Hello folks, and welcome to the channel, or welcome back. And this is part number 3 where we're preparing the RF85 to get to the track very soon for its shakedown. So we've done a lot of work already on it, so now we need to do the remaining work, like changing the spark plugs, cleaning up the engine a little bit, check the suspension and check the brakes, and also change the engine oil. And once all that is done, it should be pretty good to go. One of the things we're going to do is to put new socks over these spark plug leads, and you can see those are fairly long, and I want to protect them from the heat because they go in over the engine, and on top of it we have the exhaust. So I've ordered new socks for them, and I'm going to show you one of those old socks that I cut off because they were a little bit tacky. And before we put the socks on, we'll clean out these leads a little. They are a little bit dirty, so I like to get the grease and the dirt off. These are the socks that are going around these spark plug leads. And you can see on one side we got aluminum, and on the other side we got kind of heat resistant tissue. You can see that this stuff is pretty good. I'm just going to give it some oxygen. So that stuff is very well heat resistant, and this really protects your spark plug leads. So that's going to go back on. The ones that I ordered up are with Velcro, so I can close them properly. These ones, they were actually sewed together, so you have to feed the cable through it, a little bit more difficult, so I had to cut them open. You also might remember from the previous video that we didn't have a fuel filter, so I fitted a changeable fuel filter between the carburetor and the fuel pump just to prevent any debris coming into the actual carburetor. I also rewired the ignition system. This is the amplifier for the ignition, and here we have the ignition coil. I know it's not connected for the moment because I'm working on those cables, but the coil that I had in there was actually cracked, so we had a major crack here, so I installed the new coil on there. And this is the coil that was in the car originally, and if you look closely you can see a crack starting here. It goes all around like so to the other side, and this crack is going to cause problems. It's going to short out eventually, especially once it's getting wet. So it was more than time to get rid of this ignition coil. Everything seems to be fine now, and you'll hear it in a few minutes when I'm going to start up the car. It's running quite smoothly. These are all small little things I had to do, and I didn't really bother filming it for you. The back suspension has a very small anti-roll bar. That's the one that I have right here, which I just repainted, so it looks a little bit better. And that's fitted inside these holders, so we will install this very shortly. Of course, I have cleaned those up. And here we have our spill tank, which I disconnected and cleaned it all up, so this will have to go back in. The black stuff is some tape. The tape has also some rubber underneath, so it doesn't rub through when it's sitting on the differential house. So here we have the top of the carburetor, and I just have some cloth in it so nothing drops in, but we will have to install the filter. It's a KN filter, which is going to go on top of that. So that is another thing we'll need to install. Nothing really a big deal. These filters are really great because you can actually wash them out. So I washed this filter out, and now it looks pretty good, I would say. So that's another thing we will install. As you can see, I actually have removed the exhaust from the car, and the reason for that is that I wanted to do some work on the valves. I wanted to check them, I wanted to adjust the valve clearance, I had to take the valve cover off, and a couple of other things to clean up the engine. So removing the exhaust was a very easy thing to do. There's only one lock in the back, and then of course you unbolt them on the cylinder head. And these are mild steel pipes, so they are more than good enough really for this purpose, and you can easily disconnect them here with a little spring that goes in here. Let me show you that spring. It's just a very small little thing. So here is that spring that is locks, and then it holds that pipe into place. Nothing really special. So the pipes are laying here on the ground now and are awaiting some heat wrap, because I'm going to put some heat wrap around it, so that will really protect them a lot better. You'll notice that the exhaust is a pretty big pipe. It's 60 millimeters, so that's a large bore exhaust. And the reason for that is, and also the length of the different pipes on the header, is that you want to have a minimum amount of restriction on the exhaust so the camshaft can do its thing, especially if it's a 300 or 320 degrees camshaft. So if you want to know more about camshafts, then I recommend that you look at my video where I do talk about what camshaft to select for your specific purpose and use on your car. You might remember from the previous video that we have replaced this blue gel-based battery which was faulty. And I've placed in a red top battery that I had laying around. Well, meanwhile, I ordered up a new one, and this is the new one that's going to go in. So I will take the other one out, and then I put this one in. So, folks, so if you wonder why I'm changing that battery out after I just installed the red top, well, the red top that is in it was one that I had sitting around from one of my other cars just to check it out. So meanwhile, I ordered a new one. Now, the only electrical consumer on this car is my ignition system, and it burns about 5 amps. I have nothing else which is electrical on this car except the rain light, but that I usually don't turn on. And it's an LED light, so you can ignore that one. The battery is a 20 amps hour, so it can deliver 20 amps during 1 hour. So that basically means I could, in essence, drive about 3 to 4 hours with a single charge on the battery. I can't charge the battery in the car because I have no alternator on this engine, just to save some horsepower. So that's why I got a new one, because all the batteries, they don't have the capacity anymore, so I want to make sure that I didn't stall on the track somewhere, because that's the last thing what you want, running out of battery power on the track. I will be able to start the car with this battery, but I won't. That's why I have an 8 battery on the outside, and you've seen that before with the socket where we plug that in to start the car. So the next thing we're going to do is to change the spark plugs out, and I already have taken out the old ones. These are NGK spark plugs AP6FS. Those are really great spark plugs for the Formula 2000 Pinto-based engine. I do change those about every 10 running hours. I know you don't have to, but good new spark plugs make a big difference. So here it is, the engine. As you can see, we've cleaned it up a bit. We repainted the valve cover, and already have installed 3 new spark plugs. And I'm going to install now my last one, and then we tighten it all up. We don't over torque it, of course. That would not be good. So the next thing we're going to install is the spill tank. And I'm going to hold it in place with this here. And let's see if I did it right. Yes, I did. I will have to cut it because it's too long. And here is the spill tank. And the only purpose of a spill tank is to collect excessive fuel and oil. And of course cooling water, but the cooling water that spills over is not going into this spill tank. I have a separate one on the side for that. All right. The problem with these things is that once you cut it off, it starts to raffle out and it becomes difficult to put it in. So I always put some tape up first and then I cut it. And so here's some tape. So I'm going to stick it there. All right. And now it's just a matter of connecting the hoses. So one hose is between the spill tank and the oil tank. This is a venting hose, which we'll put up as well. And the last hose that goes into the spill tank is the hose for the overflow for the gas tank. So we're about ready to install the anti-roll bar in the back, or the torsion bar as some people call it. All right. This looks like a very small anti-roll bar, if you ask me, but that's the way it is on these cars. There are markings on this rod, so you can adjust both sides exactly the same if you want to, or different. So let's install the air filter. Make sure that it fits in the right direction. Yep. Okay. You might remember from my previous videos that we talked about the dry sump on race cars. Well, this engine here also has what we call a dry sump. And a dry sump is nothing more than a collector of oil which is dripping back out of the engine, and then it's sucked out to an external reservoir, which we have right here. It has two major advantages. The first advantage is that if you corner, you're going to experience a lot of G's, and the oil typically in a wet sump would flow to one side, and thereby you could have an interruption in your oil supply in the engine because the oil pump is going to suck air at that moment in time. Now you can prevent this with welding in waffles or baffles inside the oil pan, the wet oil pan that is, but that's adding more weight again. So that is why on race cars you typically don't have a wet sump, but you have actually a dry sump, which is very flat and it just collects the oil. Oil goes back into an external reservoir. Now, of course, now we're going to need a separate oil pump. The pump can no longer be in the wet sump. So that's why you find most of the time, somewhere on the side of the engine, a external oil pump. Let me show you that pump, because that's where I have a problem. And here we have the external oil pump. This is a 3-stage pump, and it's driven by a belt from the crankshaft. And here is that toothed belt, which drives the pulley right there. And that belt is still in a good condition because I double checked on it, because you don't want this belt to break, because then you lose total oil pressure. But it's held in place with a bolt right here and a bracket in the back. And this is the bracket that I used to have on it. I already took it off, and it was supposed to be like this. But when I checked on it, I saw it was already cracked. So this oil pump is only supported by one bolt. So now we need to make a new bracket for that. That's the piece that we have to recreate, and the original piece was one that was made out of inox. It's fairly thin, it's about 1 millimeter. So I could use 1.5 millimeter aluminum for that, but that's not strong enough not to hold that pump. So I'm going to use a 2 millimeter steel plate. So I'm going to cut this out, and then we'll bend it, and then we put it all up. So this is a little bit of tracing and bending and grinding to get it all done, but that's what we have to do. So I got my piece of metal here, and I already have traced it around with my pen. So now I can cut it out with a grinder or a cutting disc. So I'm using a very thin cutting blade for this. So let's bend the bracket. And that should be the bracket. So here's our bracket ready to be installed, and it's painted and all dried up. Okay, that seems to fit properly. I know normally you should not reuse self-locking nuts, but since these have a special thread and I don't have them available as new, I will have to reuse them. There's one hole that we need to adjust a little bit, so let's do that first of all. So I adjusted that bottom hole just a little bit. And now that should all fit properly. Sorry guys, my hands are most likely always in the way, but there isn't a lot of space to do this. Put it in straight so it grabs properly. Now that's good. That should work like a champ. The next thing up is to change the oil, and we go in to install a new oil filter. And I have this already pre-marked. I always put the date up when I'm replacing it. And I noticed that we have a little oil leak on the old oil filter. So let's have a look on how we're going to change that. As I mentioned before, the engine is having a dry sump, and here is that oil reservoir for the engine. It's 8 liters, and I'm going to use 20W50 from Castrol. Getting the oil out is either by disconnecting a hose on the oil pump, we just looked at, and then let it drain out. But that's so low to the ground that you can't really put nothing underneath. So what I'm going to do is use my big syringe here to suck out the oil. And this is a pump that I use for AdBlue normally, but you've seen me using it before for filling up gearboxes and so on. So this really helps a lot. It is better to warm up the engine and then suck it out when the oil is warm, because then it's more liquid. But in this case, I can't run the engine because I have the exhaust disconnected, and I don't want to have all that noise here. So let me see if I can suck it out. Let's see. Yep. Let's see the oil coming. It's a little bit of pulling. All right. Now I can take it out. And then we go for a second time until it's fully empty. I can hear it's almost empty. All right. I also disconnected the hose coming from the reservoir and going to the oil pump, so I get most of the oil out after I have sucked it out with the big syringe. So it looks like I can put this guy back up now. Now for this hose, I'm going to replace it with a stainless steel one, because if I hit the gravel pit, as somebody mentioned to me, this is going to cause some trouble. The easiest way to remove the oil filter for me has always been by removing the starter motor. It's only held in place with 3 bolts, and then it's easy to get it out that way. Now, I know all these cables are still loose. We will tie them up very shortly once the new filter is in, but this makes it a bit easier to work. So let me start by disconnecting the starter motor. All right, so I got the starter motor removed. And that's easy. It's just 3 bolts. That's all there is to it. And of course the little bolt that goes to the shaft. So now I can get easy to the oil filter and I can drag it out this way. But before I do so, I'm going to put a oil catch underneath. Oil filters shouldn't be really fitted real hard, but sometimes people do tighten them up a lot, so I can't get this guy off. So I need a plier to remove the oil filter. I'm using kind of a wrench which is based on a chain to get the filters off. Typically that works very well, it grabs well, but if you intend to reuse the filter, it may not be a good idea because sometimes it does damage the filter. All right, let's see if we can get it loose. Man, this is tough to get off, but it's coming. All right. It's oil coming out, as you can see, because the filter is, of course, full. And now I can take it out through this side here. I've seen a little oil leak here before, so I might think it's either was the filter that was leaking or we have a problem in the back of this ring here. These are the two possibilities. So I might want to double check on that. Let's see on the seal here, because I had some oil dripping out. So maybe the seal was gone, but the seal looks pretty much intact, although it's pretty much depressed. But I don't know. I don't know if this was the problem. It may also still be the part that's still on the engine where this filter fits onto. Let me have a look on that. The leak that we had on the oil filter was not the oil filter itself. It was actually the seal, like this seal right here, that is inside the adapter against the block of the engine. And this is the seal that was in there, and you can see how thin that seal has become. In fact, this, I suppose it was round at one time, but it's been flattened over time. This adapter, by the way, is not the one that came out of the car, but it's very similar. The one that's in the car, I left it in there because there's no need to take it out. So what I did is I looked around for another seal, and I found a square seal like this one, which is coming from another oil filter, which is exactly the same dimensions, and I already trial fitted it into the adapter, which is still on the engine, and that fits fine. And as you can see, this is a lot thicker, so this is going to seal off that adapter against the block very well. So by this, that leak should have been fixed. So now I'm going to install it, and I know it's a little bit hard to show you that because I need to crawl under the car and there's not a lot of space to film. So this is the seal that we oiled up a bit. I cleaned everything up in the back, so now I need to get the seal inside this adapter, and I think it's now properly in. And now I just need to put it all back up, and we should be good to go. All right. Let's see if the seal is still solid in it. It is. And I think this is going to be so much better. And now I can actually install my new oil filter. So here's the new oil filter, and I'm going to put some oil up on the seal. There we go. Just rub it in nicely. And now we should be able to install this filter. And that should just spin on. All right. And I'm just gonna put it really tight. And that should be it. All right. Let's see if this is gonna hold. It doesn't, and the reason is it's sitting against the bolt, so that is no good. I don't know how they've done it before me, but this certainly is not right. The problem with the oil filter is not resolved yet. This filter is too large in diameter. Now the adapter with the new seal towards the engine block, that is sorted out, that is sealed. But I cannot tighten up this filter all the way to the end because the edge is hitting a nut on the adapter. So in other words, the diameter of this filter, it's too big, and it has always been too big. So I don't know how people did it before. Now I could go for a smaller filter like this one, but this is a little bit too small, and you can see the difference. And that fits perfectly onto it. The diameter here is the same as the one here, so both are the same, but the filtering surface is a lot less, as you can see. You know, this is a major difference. So what I need to find is a filter in between, and only this deep. This one is too deep, it doesn't fit. So that's something for tomorrow. I'm going to go to the store and try to find out a suitable oil filter. I've got the wheels removed and double checked on the disc. The disc is a little bit grooved, not a lot. It's fairly thin. I think the discs themselves are getting to their minimum, but for the shakedown, I think I'm going to leave them on there and then order some new ones. I know it's going to take a while before I get them, so it won't be in time. So we're going to do it with these brakes. They are still all right. The brake pads, they are still more than good enough. So I guess for braking in the car, this will be okay. I might actually go and look around for new discs because I'm going to need those eventually. And then once we have those, we put the new brake pads up as well. But I can see the brake pads still have about 1 centimeter of material on it. So that's not an issue. So the brakes are good. I don't need to worry about it. I also checked all the nuts and the bolts on the suspension. That is good. The shock absorbers in the middle, they are good. I don't need to do much on that. So I guess I can put the wheel back on both sides, and then we continue with... So the wheels on this race car are fitted with a single nut right in the middle. And this is how it's been held in place, the wheel. It's a self-locking nut, so we should have no issue with that. I'm still going to look around to get some new ones, because after a while you probably should replace those. In fact, I normally like to replace them every time I use them. Last thing you want to have happening is the nut comes off. But the thing is that this is actually the drive shaft. So, you know, it's not going to have a lot of chance to get off. Now you see these little bolts here. They are supposed to fit in the holes of the rim because this is how the brakes are working. So if you brake, the brake pads are grabbing the disc, and the disc transfers the power over those 4 bolts onto the wheel. Here we go. Now these bolts are sitting in the holes. That's where they are supposed to be. And here's our self-locking nut. All right, so finally the missing parts have arrived, and this is heat wrap, which we're going to wrap around the exhaust. And here is one of the pipes. I've already done the other 3, but I'll show you on how we do this. And this is kind of heat resistant tissue. It's a bit nasty stuff to wrap it around it, but if you take your time it will be all right. And it's better to wear gloves because it stings a bit. I think these are polyester things that are inside, and you'll get real dirty hands. And then we go in to lock that in place with these metal bands that we have here, specifically for heat trap for the exhaust. What I also have is the heat trap or the sock for my spark plugs, and you'll see that in a minute why I'm going to need those. And this is based on Velcro. So you can see I can just pull that open and then fold it together and put it back together and have my cable inside. It protects my spark plug very well. Here I have my 3 others, and they're like 1 meter long, and you can see they are flat. You just need to fold them, nothing really special. And I guess that's about it. The other thing I have here is a special hose that I might put up the car on the bottom from the oil tank towards the oil pump. So let me show you on the car what we have done in terms of heat wrapping and protecting the spark plug leads. And then we're going to wrap this pipe here. Now for the moment I still have rain tires on the car, but obviously if the weather is dry I need to run my slicks. So I have a couple of spare rims in aluminum. So I cleaned them up, as you can see. And this specific one was actually leaking air, because those are 2 parts you can open up. And what I did is I opened them up, I glued them back together, and then I have a coat of Tech 7, which is a product which is very solid after a while and elastic, and it really closes that up nicely. So tomorrow the tire will go back on. This is the rim that I restored. I basically have been shot blasting with glass beads this aluminum rim. I know it's not as shiny as it's supposed to be, but I don't mind. I like this kind of a look. I have put Avon slicks on it, and this is going to go now on the back of the car. These are the rain tires that we have on there. I'm going to take those with me because I might need them actually on the track. If it rains, if it doesn't rain, then we're going to run our slicks. So as you can see, I already have installed 3 pipes with the heat wrap on. I had to cut off a little piece here on the top because all of the heat wrap together was getting too big and I couldn't fit the pipes properly anymore. So I'm going to cut these a little bit short. But these are the top pipes anyway, so that doesn't really matter, or it matters less. I need to put 1 more pipe up, but first we're going to wrap that up. Now let me show you why I'm having actually protected my spark plug leads. Cylinder 1, which is this spark plug right here, and cylinder 2, which is this one right here in between, are really covered by these exhaust pipes. Now remember, I don't have the last pipe in place yet, so if I'm going to run my spark plug leads like so, they will be really close to those pipes. So that is why I have actually heat wrap on my exhaust pipes, but also on my spark plug lead. So I've showed you before this heat protection sock. This is really good stuff. The same thing is true for cylinder number 2. I mean, look where this one is, right? So the last thing you want is that your spark plug leads are melting away because your exhaust is red hot. Now, cylinder 4 and 3 are better off because the pipes are not even coming close. So that heat protection sock on these cables is probably not necessary. But I'll do it anyway because I just ordered them. And it's not going to be this couple of little amount of grams that's going to make a big difference on the car, on its weight. I just have a sandwich less. So let's start wrapping this pipe up. Now, if you're going to use heat wrap, I always tend to start at the part which is closest to the engine, and then I keep running around. My first couple of windings are double, so it holds the heat wrap in place. And yeah, it's just a bunch of turning, and this stuff is pretty nasty stuff. That's why I have gloves on, otherwise you get real dirty hands and it stings a bit as well. It comes in different widths. This is about 4 centimeters. Maybe it's 5, I can't remember exactly. Yeah, it looks like 5. So if you wrap it around, make sure that you always have like a centimeter or half an inch of overlap with the previous round, let's say. Otherwise, it's gonna slip, and you gotta make sure it's really tight. Now, I would prefer to do it without gloves, but it's a bit nasty to do it. So what I typically do, I roll this off, so it's easier to work with. One of the things I wanted to say is also that if you're going to buy this, it's always good to measure the length of the pipe. then the diameter of the pipe, and then multiply how much you need for going around the pipe, and then say a 1 centimeter overlap, and you know this is 5, so then you multiply all this, and then you can order the right length basically. Now these reels, they come in lengths of 7.5 meters, I think, or 15 meters. Both do exist. So here we go. So this is always a little bit of fiddling around, but at the end it will all work out just fine. All right, I'm not going to show you the whole process of wrapping this up because that would take way too long. So I'm going to start by holding this very tight, and that's why I'd rather do this without gloves, because with gloves it's a bit clumsy. But it will work. And you want to make it absolutely tight, huh? Keep that in mind, really tight. Now this is no good, so I'll start all over again. You know, in front of the camera, it's always a bit more difficult. Yeah, this is going to be a lot better. And you see, I'm really pulling on it, and you see the overlap I'm doing. Especially on the curves, you need to give it a bit more overlap, right? So this is how I'm going to go about it, and I keep going until I'm done. And I really try to get it as tight as possible. At some point you may have to turn the part that's on the table, because I keep on rotating that. Unless you want to rotate your piece that you're wrapping, that's the other option. Now the straight line is easier. So I'm going to continue like this, guys, until I'm done, and then you will see the end result, okay? So I got this as far as I wanted to get it, and now I'm going to cut it off and put some of these tie wraps up. I'll use some pliers. Okay. Right. All right. And that should be it. There's no more anything else we need to do on it, so let's go and install it. Okay. Now let's see if we can fit the bolts to it. Now I have new gaskets that go in, and it's all very tight, as you can see. So all the bolts are in, and now I'm just going to tighten that little bit by little bit. I've set the torque to 50 pound-feet for those bolts for the exhaust manifold. All right, the next one. Spark plugs are now installed, and all 4 of them are in these heat socks. As you can see, 2 of them are here. This is cylinder number 3 and 4, and the other 2 are in the back. I just started the car a few seconds ago. I let it run for half a minute just to see if everything is all right. And you can already see that the heat wrapping here is starting to smoke, and that's normal because there's some product on it. Once the engine is running for a while, the smoke will be gone. So let me start it again, and then we'll check for oil leaks. We let it run for a while and see what happens. as you can see, the oil pressure is quite good. The temperature is now picking up. It's around 50 degrees. Oil temperature is rising as well, so I'm going to let it sit for a while. And I'm going to let it sit here until all that smoke is gone, because I don't want to have this on the racetrack.